7:02, and I am reconvening to open session and calling to order the regular Board of Education meeting for Indian Prairie School District 204 on Monday, February 28th, 2022. Jeannie, will you please call the roll?
Ms. Fosdick.
Here.
Ms. Jane. Here. Ms. Donahue.
Here.
Ms. Grover.
Here.
Ms. Deming.
Present.
Mr. Rising.
Here.
Mr. Karubis.
Here.
We have a quorum. Ms. Jane, will you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Our next Board of Education meeting will be held on Monday, March 14th, 2022. Today we have several board salutes, so I will start with Ms. Fosdick.
District 204 students compete in robotics competition. The board salutes District 204 robotics teams who were part of a 64-team tournament at the Illinois VEX Robotics Competition High School State Championship this past weekend. Each team's robot had to, either autonomously or directed by a driver, collect small rings in the arena and attach them to their goal. The Wabansie Valley WVRC Green placed third in skills, and the Metea Valley Team Jenga were tournament semifinalists. Both teams move on to the world competition, which will be held in Dallas, Texas this spring. Congratulations to all.
Mr. Karubis.
The board salutes Neuqua Valley English teacher Laura DeBezic as one of 30 finalists for the 2022 Golden Apple Award for Excellence in Teaching. The Golden Apple Foundation is an Illinois-based nonprofit focused on advancing the teaching profession. DeBezic was selected for her efforts to demonstrate to her students how much progress they can make. Congratulations, Laura.
Ms. Grover.
District 204 seniors recognized for community service. The board salutes Sean Kim, Andrew Thompson, Kshitij Veti, Micah Vemu, and Spencer Biziorek, seniors attending Neuqua Valley, on winning the 2022 Robotics Education and Competition Foundation Community Online Challenge Award, sponsored by Google. The students were recognized for their outstanding volunteer work for the past 5 years at the VEX competitions and also served as tournament volunteers, mentored teams, and presented at STEM nights. Congratulations on this great achievement.
Ms. Jane.
The board salutes Metea Valley bowling coach Kristen Mansmith and the Metea Valley bowling team on qualifying for the state tournament that was held on February 18th and 19th at the Cherry Bowl in Rockford. Metea Valley senior Sydney Lewis finished 13th overall, which was Metea Valley's third best finish for an individual. The seniors are 4-time DuPage Valley Conference champs, 2-time state qualifiers, 2021 virtual state sectional champs, and 4th place in virtual state. This will be Coach Mansmith's final season as head coach. Congratulations to all on this stellar achievement.
Ms. Deming.
District 204 students recognized at the National Scholastic Art Competition. The board salutes the 29 Indian Prairie High School art students who were recognized at this year's Scholastic Art Competition. The national competition recognizes students for their creative talents. Our high schools participate in the suburban Chicago art region that serves DuPage, Kane, Kendall, Will, and portions of Cook County. And this year's regional competition included over 2,300 entries. The 37 works submitted by our students garnered 8 Gold Key Awards, 13 Silver Keys, and 16 honorable mentions. Congratulations to our student artists and their teachers on this outstanding accomplishment.
And Mr. Rising.
Metea Valley seniors earned Eagle Scout honors. The board salutes Metea Valley seniors Carter Wajenko and Sean Brennan on achieving Eagle Scout honors. The Boy Scouts of America is one of the nation's largest and most prominent values-based youth development organizations, and the Eagle Scout Award is their highest achievement award. Congratulations, Carter and Sean.
Okay, this evening we will have two student representative reports. The first is by Saad Qureshi from Metea Valley High School.
Thank you. Oop. Am I working? Perfect. Good evening, everybody. My name is Saad Qureshi, and I'm the class of 2023 Executive Board Representative from Metea Valley, and I'm very excited to join you all tonight. Metea Valley hosted the incoming 8th grade orientation where the class of 2026 had the opportunity to get a taste of what to expect this fall. The orientation included exhibits from all of the departments at Metea Valley, followed by a presentation from the MCs and Dr. Eccles. Metea cannot wait to see the class of 26 in the halls this fall. Metea Valley celebrated Black History Month all throughout the month of February. Every morning announcement contained a famous quote by some of the most inspirational African Americans throughout history. Black History Month concluded with an assembly that contained performances from talented students at Metea Valley. Metea Valley also commemorated African American students who received the title of an IP Scholar during this assembly. Congratulations to our MV All-State musicians who were selected to perform in the Illinois Music Educators Conference All-State Choir, Orchestra, Band, and Vocal Jazz Ensembles. These students were selected to perform with selected musicians from high schools throughout Illinois. Students originally auditioned at the district level to perform with top student musicians from the western Chicago suburbs. Following the district performance, the students below were selected to perform at the all-state level. Congratulations to Hakan Basar, Pratish Chakraborty, Aryan Chandra, Anna Kim, Vivian Kak, Adriel Marty, Luca Nigro, and Mahati Vudakru. Congratulations once again, Mustangs. The Mustang speech team dominated the Gradient to become the regional championship for the first time in school history. What a historic display of grit and toughness by all 14 of our regional representatives, and not to forget the performances by the rebound members. Here are our regional champions: Jonathan Barker, Jilly Mabule, Neha Takala, Satwika Paul, Tanmay Varshni, Amara Salim, Zainab Sheikh, Peyton Owen, and Nikhil Venkat. We are so proud of you. Keep up the awesome work, Mustangs. And lastly, our athletics. Congratulations to our seniors who declared and signed on 2/2/22. The co-ed cheer team were named conference champions and have qualified for state. They competed this past month and placed 15th in the state and put up a mean cheer routine. Fantastic job, Mustangs. The bowling team was named conference champions and participated this past month in the regional tournament. Keep up the awesome job, Mustangs. Jaden Gamilla placed 4th in the 200 IM swim this past weekend. Fantastic job, Jaden. As winter sports come to an end, the spring season is right around the corner and athletes are eager to get back onto the court, field, track, and pool. And I think I've missed a ton of other achievements, so you're just going to have to stop by our trophy case and see all the hardware that we've won. That's all I have for the February board report. Thanks, everybody. And as always, go Mustangs.
Next, we'll have the student representative report by Lisa Nadtochiy from Neuqua Valley High School.
Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Good evening, everyone. My name is Lisa Nadtochiy. I'm Neuqua Valley's school board representative, and it is my pleasure to represent Neuqua for you all here tonight. So many Wildcats got the chance to show off their talents over the last few months, ranging from the variety show to the Orchestra Showcase. The team showed off what they've been working on all season and honored the seniors, who will definitely be missed. Neuqua also recently held its annual male beauty pageant known as Mr. NVHS. Congratulations to Sachin Fong and his saxophone skills for being this year's winner, as well as all of the other contestants and the special events committee for all of their hard work. Wildcats have won state titles all over Illinois. The speech team took 5th in the state due to the hard work of finalists Luke Fosdick, Aditi Vadakath, and state champion Yasha Sardesai in original oratory. The chess team took 4th place at state, and we couldn't be more proud. The boys' swim team has also had a fantastic season, winning sectionals and sending many finalists to state. The boys' basketball team also won their regional, and BPA did a fantastic job at state, qualifying 17 competitors for nationals in Dallas. Congratulations to all of you, and keep making Neuqua proud. Even more spring sports are starting to bloom, including baseball, softball, soccer, tennis, lacrosse, water polo, and badminton. We can't wait to see what you'll achieve this season. The Neuqua Theater Department is starting their production of Grease, which will definitely be memorable. Keep an eye out for tickets and make sure to catch the show in April and May. Course selection has been finalized for the incoming school year with hundreds of classes to choose from. We can't wait to welcome the class of 2026 and every Wildcat that will join us in the next year. Even more Wildcats are being honored at the Indian Prairie Scholars Induction, which is the first senior honorary event, promising to open a great season of appreciation for all of our graduates. Neuqua Honors will soon be underway as well. Finally, Neuqua's own English teacher, Mrs. Laurie DeBezic, is a finalist for the Golden Apple, the highest award in education. You certainly made my junior year memorable, and congratulations for a very deserved honor. It's been a pleasure speaking to you all tonight. Thank you for listening. Stay safe and healthy. Have a great night, and as always, go Wildcats.
It is now time for public comment. 60 minutes is allowed for public comment, and each person is limited to 3 minutes. When addressing the board, we ask that you respect the confidentiality and safety of our students and school district personnel. We also ask that those addressing the board be cognizant that this is an open meeting and is available to all age groups, and as such, ask that you consider who the audience members are this evening and keep your comments age appropriate. Public comment represents the voice and opinion of the speaker. There will be no feedback from the board members during the meeting, but follow-up will be provided by an administrator as appropriate. Our first speaker is Becky Simon.
Hello. I'm really glad to be here on a quiet, uneventful evening. My name is Becky Simon. I'm speaking for the League of Women Voters of Naperville. League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan political organization. We do not support or oppose candidates for public office. Our motto is empowering voters and defending democracy. As part of that effort, we are committed to fostering civility in public discourse and dignity and respect in politics by applying the golden rule of doing unto others as you would have them do unto you. However, in our line of work, we see quite a bit of uncivil discourse. During the last election cycle, this escalated dramatically, and it has continued, as I'm sure you know. Whether we are talking about wearing masks, school attendance boundaries, or vaccines, angry discourse does not serve democracy well. League asks our fellow citizens to speak up, make your point to your school board and to others, but do so in a respectful and civil manner. Remember, we all have the same goal: to educate the next generation and prepare them to lead us into the future. The person you are addressing in an email, in a public meeting such as this, or in a Facebook post is your neighbor. You'll see them again in line at the store, at parent-teacher night, or when you're out raking leaves and shoveling snow. Most importantly of all, our children are watching. The next generation of American democracy is watching you. Let's all be good role models. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Andrea Day.
Good evening, everyone. Please excuse me, I'm very nervous, but I'm doing this on behalf of my son. I wanted to lead off by saying that I have an email from Dr. Ayala, the superintendent of the Illinois State Board of Education, sent to all Illinois educators on Friday, February 25th, stating, per the governor's announcement, masks are optional for all schools and school districts as of February 28th. ISBE will work with the Illinois Department of Public Health to update our guidance documents as soon as possible. That is a direct quote from the email, so please tell me why pre-K students are still in masks. As if this information alone was not enough for the mask mandate to end for pre-K immediately, I'll continue. Dr. Talley, last week you responded to an email I sent asking for data to support the continuation of masking pre-K students. You stated that you have data for those 5 and older related to vaccination, yet the only metric of vaccination that was shared in the communication on February 13th was that of the 7 zip codes that make up the entirety of District 204, which I'm assuming includes all ages. Do you have exact numbers on how many 5 to 17 are vaccinated in 204 by age? And if so, what are those percentages? Since that information has not been shared, one can assume you are only going off of community vaccination rate and not specific age groups in making your determination for all the other schools. If that is so, then the 72 to 90% community vaccination rate should be sufficient to allow for pre-K to be mask optional as well. Even if you have data broken out by age group, it wouldn't be applicable to the pre-K age group since scientifically you cannot blanket results from one age group to another. I'm sure as you know there are many variables that can produce considerably different outcomes between age groups. An example of this we are clearly seeing in the lack of progression with the vaccine for children under 5. Again, the only metric you are now even considering is a metric that's currently impossible to reach since the vaccine request for emergency youth authorization was pulled. So are you stating that the only way masks will become optional for pre-K is when a vaccine is available? What if that day does not come, which is a very real possibility? Again, I ask you and the board to present parents with data that shows the efficacy of masks in pre-K age group, how masks have decreased transmission and severe illness within preschools, and any information that can contradict the multiple peer-reviewed studies now showing how detrimental masking is for preschool children in both speech and cognitive development. If you truly are making this decision based on facts, data, and what you claim is for the best interest of our children, then the information requested should be easily provided. But you haven't provided that because it doesn't exist, it's not there. Please stop harming our pre-K children for reasons that at this point seem inexplicable and not supported by science. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Carly Olson.
Hi there. My name is Carly Olson, and I don't have much to say other than a mandate is just that. It's a mandate. It's not a law, and you broke the law when you fired me for not complying with your illegal mandates. Upon taking office, you took an oath to uphold the Constitution of the state of Illinois and of the United States of America, and you failed to do so. As a result, you are being put on public notice, and if you do not meet the conditions listed in my letter of intent, then I'll be filing a claim on your surety bond for wrongful termination and discrimination. You have 72 hours to comply. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The next speaker is Brooklyn Bearden. Go ahead, Brooklyn.
Hello, my name is Brooklyn Bearden. I'm in 8th grade from Granger Middle School. I'm one of the 8 families named in the lawsuit from District 204. I would also like to thank the parents and our lawyer, Tom DeVore, and the judge for standing up for us kids. Now that the masks are optional, I'm proud to say I'm one of the kids that don't wear one. I haven't worn a mask to school since February 6th. For that whole week, I was harassed because I was the only one out of 1,071 kids not wearing a mask at Granger. I've had horrible pictures of me posted on many stories, people screaming in the hallways, anti-masker, you look goofy, you're not better than anyone, and so on. Like even today, I'm still getting picked on in my class. Even though I was made fun of, my great principal, Mr. Davenport, helped me through all of it. This would have not been the case at all if the school board made the mask optional at the beginning of the year. I would have not been singled out. How are you guys going to stop the bullying and harassments now that the masks are optional? The kids these days have no respect for others and need to be more respectful of people's choices. After all, we do live in America. And hear me out. How is it allowed to sit in my middle school gym for sports games close together, packing 3 kids to a seat for a 30 to 45-minute bus ride? That's if you're lucky enough to get a seat. Yes, one day I had to sit on an instrument, which was very uncomfortable. Then to add to it, Kids aren't staying in their seats or wearing masks at lunch anyways, so when will we be able to sit by our friends again at lunch? And why did it take so long for the mask to get off? Can someone please tell me how this makes sense, because I don't understand. And instead of the school board and Governor Pritzker's worrying about these masks, you should be worried about the real problems, like mental illnesses and suicide rates of teens being on the rise after the teens were locked up for 2 years in quarantine. Why are we worried about the masks when the kids are depressed by themselves? These kids also think it's normal to wear a mask now because it makes them feel prettier, or because it'll hide acne, or even because the mask will help them from getting sick. You people have these kids so scared they won't take off their masks. Maybe if the teachers and staff started taking them off, the kids would follow. I've stood up for almost a month not wearing a mask so the kids don't have to wear one anymore. Take the masks off the children, because it's not normal and healthy. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Matt Jubel.
My name is Matt Dubiel. I'm here for Natalie, Rocco, Anthony, and Stella. My 4 kids have been through IPSD 204. Great job talking, by the way. We started this with the pledge, and the pledge has indivisible in it. And these kids have been divided, and there's been a lot of discussion about what can't be done or what shouldn't be done and what should we stop doing. I think it's time also to have some discussion about what needs to happen and what we should be doing and what should be happening on a regular basis. I was disappointed by the video. I was actually heartened to see a video by the principal of Neuqua Valley School doing a video to encourage the kids with the change of mask on, mask off policies. I thought that was great. Very smart to do. What I didn't appreciate was the tone and the concept behind it, which was, this is going to be very difficult. This is what we call in management, what we call in learning, a teaching opportunity. All of this is a teaching opportunity. Nobody here is perfect. Everyone's trying to figure this out as we go. But this is a teaching opportunity in institutions of learning to teach about math, statistics, science, basic common sense interpretations, and civics. Those things are supposed to be taught, especially at the high school level and junior high level. These kids should be learning about civics. They should be learning that we don't live in a dictatorship. Their teachers are teaching them about dictators. Putin is an evil dictator. There are other evil dictators. Are they learning that Trudeau is behaving like a dictator? Are they learning that our governor, when he doesn't have the legislator write a law and they don't take it and vote on it, and he doesn't sign it into law, it's not a law? That's what you should be teaching these kids in all of these schools. They should be learning the Constitution. They should be tested on it again. They should have to carry it around. Without the Constitution, none of us are here. Without the Constitution, we're the Ukraine, or we're Russia, or we're Canada, or we're wherever lots of us came from. My family came here from other countries, and we didn't come here for some of the nonsense that's going on in our schools. My kids introduced themselves. We're so excited. Oh, we're back at school, in-person learning. And they had to go around the room and tell what their pronouns were. Are we going to do zodiac signs next? What kind of nonsense is that? My daughter doesn't know how to vote or how to register to vote. She didn't learn that in these schools. But we did it the other day. I showed her how. And when she registered, they asked her, is she male or female? There's 2 options. It's time to start focusing on the Constitution
speaker's time has
and
ended.
math, science,
very
and
much.
civics in these schools that you're responsible for.
Thank you very much. Okay, we now move to our consent agenda and superintendent report. We will start with the superintendent report. Dr. Talley.
Ms. Donahue, members of the board, and the Indian Prairie community, tonight, unfortunately, I must start off with sad news. Late last week, one of our students, Miss Olivia Parker, an 8th grader who attends Gregory Middle School, and before that, Clow, passed away after a long illness. We are very saddened by the passing of Olivia and send our condolences to her family and want her family to know we are thinking of them in this most difficult time. I ask that we take a moment of silence right now to honor Olivia. Thank you. I want to provide an update on the boundary grandfathering. As you know, we have allowed a very generous grandfathering proviso in our new boundaries that allowed all students going into grades 5, 7, 8, 10, 11, and 12 to be grandfathered and stay in their schools. Though we are still working on the transportation part of the grandfathering, we had 543 requests for grandfathering. This number represented approximately 20% of the total number of students impacted by the boundary study. We'll be sharing more information about transportation at a future Board of Ed meeting in early April. In a prior update in January, I talked about IPF's Inspire 22 event that will take place on March 11th. There is still time to purchase tickets. This event, which showcases the artistic and creative talents of our students who will perform and show their art. In addition, we are able to raise funds for IPF, which provides programs that directly support our students. I hope that many of you will consider participating in this inaugural event. IPF was instrumental in establishing our very first Fine Arts Festival and in supporting other great causes over the years, including our A+ awards for teachers through collaboration with Wells Fargo Advisors. Last week, I was able to present 3 of those A+ awards, and it is most gratifying to be there when those teachers receive them and how surprised they are. There is a great partnership with the district, and I know with this fundraiser, we'll continue the great work of supporting our students. I ask that you consult ipf204.org for ticket information. As we come to the end of January, I want to say that our schools have been very much engaged in celebrating Black History Month through various programs in the schools. From individual classroom events to school-wide events, our children and staff have been involved in exploring and celebrating the achievements of African Americans. This work, though highlighted in February, expands throughout the school year and is not only done during this month. And finally, before I turn my part of the meeting over, I would like the Board of Ed to approve an appointment that is before you tonight. I am recommending that the Board of Ed approve Mr. Nader Najjar as the new Executive Director of Education Equity starting July 1. Mr. Najjar is filling the position that was vacated by Dr. Rowe earlier this year. Mr. Najjar is coming to us from Downers Grove North High School, where he is currently a special education teacher, equity and inclusion training, and curricular technology consultant. He has done training on equity with Downers Grove. He has more than 20 years of experience as an educator, and in his interview, he demonstrated a deep understanding of the work of equity. He said, quote, "Equity is about ensuring that there are checks and balances are there for all students and not just for some." Back to you, Ms. Donahue.
So I need a motion to approve Nader Najjar as Executive Director of Educational Equity as presented. Any discussion? Is that a first or a second?
Sorry. That was the first time.
Okay.
I move that we approve, make the approval of the of the Executive Director for Educational Equity.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Jeannie, will you please take the roll?
Ms. Deming,
Aye.
Ms. Grover,
Yes.
Mr. Krubis,
Yes.
Mr. Rising,
Yes.
Ms. Donahue,
Yes.
Ms. Jane,
Yes.
Ms. Fosdick.
Yes.
The motion passes. Congratulations and welcome, Mr. Najjar. All right, next we move to our consent agenda items. I need a motion and a second to approve consent agenda items E through P.
Make a motion that the Board of Education approve consent agenda items E through P as presented.
Is there a second?
Second.
Jeannie, any discussion? Do you have a comment, Mr. Krubis? No, okay. Jeannie, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Rising.
Yes.
Ms. Fosdick.
Yes.
Mr. Karubis.
Yes.
Ms. Jane.
Yes.
Ms. Donahue.
Yes.
Ms. Grover.
Yes.
Ms. Deming.
Aye.
The motion passes. Next, we move to our action items. I need a motion and a second to approve the appointment of Ann Wilson Loken as hearing officer as presented.
Make a motion that the Board of Education approve the appointment of Ann Wilson Loken as hearing officer as presented.
Is there a second?
This is Natasha Grover, a second.
Any discussion? Okay. Jeannie, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Rising.
Yes.
Ms. Grover.
Yes.
Mr. Karubis.
Yes.
Ms. Jane.
Yes.
Ms. Deming.
Yes.
Ms. Donahue.
Yes.
Ms. Fosdick.
Yes.
The motion passes. Now I need a motion and a second to approve the action regarding a student discipline matter as presented.
I move that the Board of Education approve the action regarding a student discipline matter as presented.
Second. Oh, second.
Is there a
Was
second?
that Mr. Rising? or
No,
Ms.
it's separate.
It's
Okay.
fine.
Second.
It doesn't matter.
Okay. Any discussion? Jeannie, will you please call the roll?
Ms. Fosdick.
Yes.
Ms. Jane. Ms. Deming.
I abstain.
Ms. Grover.
Yes.
Ms. Donahue.
Yes.
Mr.
Did I
Karubis.
vote? Yes.
I don't think I voted either.
The motion passes.
Oh, wait, Mr. Rising?
Yes.
Uh-oh. Are we done now?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, we are kind of a little bit discombobulated. Okay, the motion passes.
And just for point of clarification, those last two motions, we can't really discuss because they're because of confidentiality reasons. So I just wanted to make that clarification.
Okay. Lastly, I need a motion and a second. I'm assuming I can do this.
You can read it.
Okay, and a second to approve substitute teaching work by Laurie Donahue up to $1,000 as presented.
I move that the Board of Education approve substitute teaching work by Laurie Donahue up to $1,000 as presented.
Second.
Okay, there is some discussion, because I'm going to say something here. So, all right, for the last, I don't know how many years, and especially this past year, I have heard repeated comments about the need for school bus drivers and for substitute teachers. And we need them every day in our district. And I want to make sure that our students are here every day. So I'm not a good driver, as some of you have experience with driving with me. So that left, can I do something for substitute teaching? I think Dr. Talley has talked about this previously multiple times. You need a bachelor's degree to be a substitute teacher, which I have, and the willingness to help with the students in the district. So my pure reasons for doing this is to help and to hopefully support a classroom if needed, so that we don't have to tap our teachers to move into rooms and double book the teachers and their time. And so the limitation of $1,000 is something related to the conflict of interest or whatever. I'm not really doing it for any of the money. It's just something that we have to put in here to approve. And there is a stipulation if I go beyond up to 1,000 and I want to go to 2,000, which would mean more days substituting, that I would come back to the board. And the maximum that could be approved for the entire year is 2,000. But So again, I'm doing this to help out, and hopefully it maybe will inspire other people to fill out the paperwork to become a substitute in the district, because we need your help. So with that,
And I'd just like to compliment you too, Laurie. You had brought this up at a Board of Education meeting earlier in the school year, when the district put a call out for needing bus drivers, needing substitute teachers. You know, I believe you said you were even considering it during the board meeting, of stepping up and being a substitute teacher. And I know you're not doing this. I know you're retired, and I know you're not doing this for the money, or there to do it to help out our school district and our teachers. So I just wanted to commend you on that, and hopefully we get additional people in our community to step up and be a substitute teacher as well. So thank you.
I want to compliment you as well, and I support the role model aspect of this. I don't even think that it is legally necessary to put this on the agenda for you to fill this role. So I commend you for the full disclosure of what's going on and trying to make it inspire others to do it. So definitely support this motion.
any other discussion? I will say you are correct, Mr. Rising. I did bring this up quite a while ago in the early on, and it took me a while to get my stuff together. And yeah, I'm also still working on my husband also to get him signed. No, he doesn't want to do it. But anyways, all right. Jeannie, will you please call the roll?
Ms. Jane? Yes. Ms. Deming?
Aye.
Ms. Grover?
Yes.
Ms. Fosdick?
Yes.
Mr. Karubis?
Yes.
Mr. Rising?
Yes.
And Ms. Donahue?
Well, I will abstain, but the motion passes, so thank you.
Thank you.
So we will now have a presentation from Mr. Matt Shipley on the budget forecast. Welcome.
All right. Good evening, members of the Board of Education. As President Donahue mentioned, this is our financial forecast. This will cover a 5-year period, so going from fiscal years 2022, our current fiscal year, up to fiscal year 2027. Tonight's presentation is consistent with Board Policy 4.10 and also Board Goal number 3. This is sort of the kickoff or the start of our process as we look forward to passing a budget for the 2023 school year. So this will be the first of 3 presentations this spring, and that'll eventually lead up to our adoption of the legal budget in September of 2022. I'll just point out up front, you know, our budgeting and forecasting really is a year-long process, a continual process. We traditionally start presenting to the board in public around this time, and that's really just because 2 key data points become available for us here in February, and that's the release of the prior calendar year CPI, and then the state budget starts to become available or in draft form as well. So we'll cover both those in more detail going forward, but that's really why we start this time of year. Tonight's presentation is going to have the widest focus of any of the remaining budget presentations, so we're really looking at a 5-year focus, really both going forward and backward in a lot of the presentation tonight. We're primarily going to be focused on the revenues of the district, and then as we move along the process, we start transitioning into the expenditure side or narrowing our focus to what next year's budget looks like and what we recommend to the board for expenditures. And then we're going to look at our operating funds primarily together tonight, so we won't go into a lot of detail about individual funds. We'll look at the funds in a collective. So as mentioned, tonight's agenda will start with revenues, fiscal years 2023 to 2027. Again, won't talk a lot about expenditures, but we will talk about some of the long-term trends, challenges, and priorities as we start looking forward to the 2023 budget. We will cover our non-operating funds, so both our bond and interest fund and our capital projects fund, again for a 5-year period. And then finally, we'll close with what the next steps will be and if the board has any questions. So as mentioned, this presentation is consistent with District Goal number 3, which states that by June 30th of each year, the district will receive the State Board of Education's Financial Profile Designation of Recognition. This is the highest designation awarded. In simpler terms, this really recognized that we are passing balanced budgets and that we were leaving an adequate fund balance or reserve to ensure the stability of the district. So tonight's presentation is consistent with district goal number 3. We would be projected to hit recognition status in all 5 of these years presented. So I'm going to start just showing where we are currently with 2022 revenues. Again, this is generally consistent with prior years, and as the Board of Education knows, property taxes are the overwhelming majority of our revenues, coming in at 77%. That's been relatively consistent. It's our most reliable source of funds. We are fortunate that we have a high collection rate on our property taxes. And again, we are going to project that forward over the course of this forecast. I'll point out the one big change in 2022 revenues from prior years is the increase in federal revenues. However, that still only brings us to 6% of the total revenues. And we'll talk in a little bit about why that increase occurred and how we project that to occur over the next 5 years. So this is our operating revenue forecast summary for the next 5 years. So you'll see the budget for fiscal year 2022 on the far left side, and then columns for each of the next 5 projected years. Again, fiscal 23 through fiscal 27. I'll just walk through each revenue in detail in a little bit, but I'll just point that total revenue, we're projecting an increase of 4.33% for next year. That's one of the highest increases in revenue I think we've seen, at least in recent history in the district. Within the 5-year range, we're projecting revenue increases between just over 2% up to that 4.33%. What's really driving that is an increase in property taxes for next year of 4.36%. I'll point out, we'll talk a little bit later about why we're projecting a significant increase in state funding for next year, an increase of specifically in the other state revenue category, which is our categoricals. And then one piece I'll point out that we're still not sure about, and so we've put it on its own line, is this lunch revenue area. As I think you know, traditionally we had students pay for lunch in our cafeterias. All lunch has been free this year and covered by the federal government. So that has increased federal revenues this year. That's part of the reason federal revenues went up to 6% this year. We're still not sure what the USDA is going to do for next year, if they will continue that program for all students, or if they will revert back to a paying for lunch model. So we are showing that separately. Again, that could have some swing, not necessarily in total revenues, but in what we end up forecasting for local revenues versus federal revenues. So just want to start, this will be sort of a recurring theme as we look at both revenues and expenses, and that's the Consumer Price Index and where we are currently. We are currently at the highest Consumer Price Index that we've seen in the past 30 years. It came in at 7% for fiscal year 2021, and then the rolling average in January, so the amount that would have been released for a 12-month period from February 1 of 2021 to January 31st of 22 is at 7.5%. So it actually continued to increase through January. This is the first time CPI has been above 5% since the adoption of the Property Tax Extension Limitation Law, or PTEL. So we'll cover in a minute what challenges that presents for the district. But in general, we're pretty much in unprecedented area with CPI currently. For the forecasted piece, we are projecting this to be a temporary spike. We do expect CPI to come in above 2% next year at 3%, but we are still taking the Federal Reserve's recent guidance that they are still looking to get to that long-term trend rate of about 2% in the long term. So hopefully we see a CPI of about 3% in 2022 and then tapering back to that 2% in those out years. But obviously we're in unprecedented times, and there's still a lot of uncertainty around that now. So we'll talk about the challenges this provides both on the revenue and expense side, but we work very hard to make sure that we are at least tying both our revenues and expenses to CPI, and that both are kind of aligned, so that if we see an increase in CPI on revenues, we also see it on expenses, or vice versa. So again, just moving into property taxes and some of the specific challenges that this CPI number brings in. And the first is really that our property tax extension limitation law limits the amount of CPI for 5% when we talk about the property tax calculation. So even though we know CPI is 7%, and that's the amount that's federally reported, for PTEL purposes, we're limited to 5%. So that really creates a 2% discrepancy over what we're seeing on the expenditure side, but what we're able to capture as part of our property tax levy process. And that's 2% we never get back. So we don't get a chance to catch up or apply it to prior years or anything like that. That's 2% that the district kind of permanently loses against the consumer price index. The second piece, which I have a few slides on, but there is also a collection lag between when we start seeing the CPI increase and then when we're able to capture that as part of the levy. And that really just comes back to how the levy works and the laws that govern that tax levy and tax extension process. And then the final piece is that although CPI is increasing, and that increases the value that we tax and ultimately keeps the tax rate stable or decreases, we don't see that property values consistently increase across property types or across different areas within the district. So that's another piece we'll cover in a few slides. So again, just want to walk through this slide a little bit on really how that consumer price index then feeds into what we levy. And again, this will really show why there's some lag in that process. So for the 21-22 school year, the 2 calendar year CPIs that impact our property tax revenue are the 2019 and 2020 calendar years. So again, we're looking in arrears either 1 year or 2 years based on what the levy's set at. And so if you walk through this, the 2019 calendar year CPI was 2.3%. That was used in the levy we passed a year later in December of 2020. Because it was under 5, it stays at 2.3%. But then there's a 6-month delay between when that levy is passed in December and we actually receive the collections from both our counties. So that 2.3% becomes part of that June 21 collection as well as that September 21 collection. So that's really where that lag occurs, is that we're talking about a CPI in 2019 that we don't collect until the 2021 calendar year. And obviously that transitions as we go through the fiscal years as well. When CPI is relatively stable, obviously this doesn't have a significant impact because the CPI stay relatively consistent between years. Some years you maybe win a little bit because you're lower than what you were a year or 2 years ago, or some years maybe you lose because of how the CPI has changed. But when we're dealing with a significant increase, this is where that lag comes in and starts to become a factor. So for this year, for 21-22, the current school year, we're looking at a blended CPI increase rate of 1.85%. So that's taking that calendar year 2019 CPI and the 2020 CPI and blending it to 1.85. We do get to add for new property, which generally comes in around 0.5 to 0.7% for our district, and that increases our levy by 2.45%. So again, this is an example where we've already seen the price increase because CPI for calendar year 21 was 7%, but the CPI for our levy does not reflect that. It's only a 2.45% increase. So just going to walk through that again for the first year of this forecast, which would be the 22-23 school year. For this year, again, we're starting with the 2020 CPI that was used in the levy we passed in December and are now collecting our first collection on in June of 2022, and then having a September 2022 collection applying to the 22-23 fiscal year. The second half of this, then, the second CPI we're using is the 2021 calendar year CPI, and this is where you can see that 7% of the calendar year becomes a 5% CPI for PTEL. So that's where we lose that 2% that, again, we'll never get a chance to capture back. And we won't see that 5% increase until we get to June of 2023's collection, so over a year from today. This creates a blended CPI of 3.2%. If we assume a new property amount of 0.6%, this will increase our property tax levy for 22-23 by about 3.8%. So am I making sense? Are people following along on this? I know this is a little bit more detail than I like to go through on PowerPoints, but just thought it was important to show this. And then finally, I'll show 23-24. Again, that calendar year 21 CPI plays a factor in this calculation as well. We have the 2 percentage point reduction because of PTEL. This is the 3% that, again, is at this point an estimate. But even if that 3% goes significantly higher, we're going to be limited by the 5% PTEL limit, and we're going to be limited because that's so far in arrears that our 23-24 school year increase is projected at 4.5%, but really at most would only be 5.5%. And so we're going to have 3 years now in a row of levies that don't hit that 7% CPI. So I did want to show how these projections impact the forecasted tax rates that our taxpayers throughout the district feel. And I'll say our EAVs, our property values, continue to be strong. They continue to trend above CPI. And then again, because we're losing 2%, our taxpayers are going to see an additional savings on their tax rate as a result of that. So you can see we've had historical tax rates that in 2016 were about 5.6% in total, about 0.54 for a debt service levy, and then just over 5 for operating. We're forecasting that down for 2021 to right around 5.27%. And then we continue to forecast that down as we look at levy years 2022 through levy years 2026. I will point out what we'll cover when we look at the debt service non-operating fund a little bit later, how the debt service gets paid off. We in the 2026 levy year, we will be at this point fully paid off on our debt service, and we'll be able to pass that full savings on to our taxpayers, which would create a situation where we only have an operating tax levy, and that levy would again continue to decrease as we go on throughout the levy years. Just moving on to the third topic, a little bit about the equity we see across district and property tax values. All our tax holders pay the same rate each property tax year, and that's regardless of property type, which municipality. Obviously, we have residents and businesses in 4 municipalities. Everybody pays the same rate, but as we see this rate go down, what's generating that rate decrease is an EAV increase, and not every property holder necessarily sees an increase of EAV at the same rate. So one of the things we're seeing as a long-term trend is we're seeing that our residential property continues to be strong, continues to see significant increases in EAV, but our commercial property is not seeing that. And so even though our rate's decreasing, we're passing additional property tax burden onto our residents from our commercial taxpayers. As a district, we rely on the counties to do the assessment process on our behalf and the collection process.
I'm going to interrupt you really briefly.
Sure.
We're not shifting the burden from the commercial property to the residential property. The system is set up that happens automatically.
Correct. Thanks for the clarification. That's not anything conscious. Again, that's done at the district level. Again, everybody pays the same rate, which is controlled by the levy we pass. But how that is spread out, you're correct, is a process that's really controlled at the county level through the assessment process and the collection process. So I'll just further clarify that this is a topic that traditionally has been pretty opaque to the district. You know, we do rely on the county to do that service. We have a good relationship with both our assessors, but we don't have a lot of visibility into how that process really works on the day-to-day. We're with improvements in data analytics and some of the data that's available. This is all public data that can be FOIA'd from the county. We are looking into how we can obtain that data, do some analysis on behalf of the district, on behalf of our district residents, and really start identifying what some of these long-term trends are in more detail. And so I do hope to bring to the board in one of our spring sessions that initial analysis. And if there are any recommendations or any takeaways that we can bring and act on at a district level, we would, again, look to do that as starting this spring. So that is something that we're starting to look at, where maybe we have more visibility than we've traditionally had. And I know one aspect that's off topic, but I know Board Member Grover's asked in the past about how tax-exempt property fits into this, and that would be part of that analysis too, is, for example, are we seeing tax burden, again, shift, not because of anything on the district's doing, but are we seeing tax burden shift to our residents because of an increase, for example, in tax-exempt property, or just seeing more tax-exempt property in our district than maybe some of our comparables? So we did talk about that concept kind of intra-district, or how that works specifically to Indian Prairie 204 residents or property taxpayers. This just shows the wide variety in EAV EAV per student across our 8 comparable districts. And you'll see that there is significant variance in the amount of property tax value available to our comparable districts. In this case, we are the lowest of these 8 comparable districts. You can see we come in at about 220,000 EAV per pupil. There are several districts that are above 300,000 within our comparable districts, with both Barrington 220 and Elmhurst 205 coming in with over 340,000 of EAV per pupil, or over 50% more EAV than we have in Indian Prairie. As a district, when you rely on property taxes, when over 3/4 of your revenue is property taxes, this is going to have a trickle-down impact on our spending per student. It also impacts the property tax rate then that's paid on that property. So again, you can see the sort of inverse of property value is property rate. Not surprisingly, of these comparable districts, Barrington, Elmhurst, and Naperville 203 have the lowest tax rate because they're the highest EAV. We're actually somewhat in the middle here, despite having the lowest EAV per pupil. Wanted to move on to the state of Illinois and what our 5-year forecast is projecting as a result of the state of Illinois proposed budget. I'll start by saying that the state of Illinois continues to have a funding system that is inadequate and inequitable for funding public education. So although some of these bullet points look like good news and relatively speaking are good news, we still operate under a system that does not adequately fund or equitably fund education. Governor Pritzker issued his proposed budget for fiscal year 2023, the first year of February. This historically has been a pretty good basis for understanding what the approved budget is going to look like, especially in a situation where both the legislature and the governor's office are coming from the same political party. The proposed budget increases total funding for K-12 education by approximately 5.4%. That's highlighted by an EBF, or evidence-based funding, increase of approximately $300 million, an increase to the categorical payments of approximately 10%, so that's a significant increase in the categoricals. That references that other state revenue category that I showed earlier. Also, as significant, but not necessarily in the budget address, we currently have no immediate concerns about potential pension cost shift or property tax freeze legislation. So this has always been sort of the 2 hottest topics when it comes to the state looking to shift education cost burden from a state to the local school districts. So we're really not hearing any talk about imminent or proposed legislation within this legislative session, but I'll say there's no guarantees that that's a long-term trend. I think there's a lot of things that are causing that. First, this is an election year, so there tends to not be as much of a push for those sort of ideas in an election year. Secondly, we know there's still some newer leadership in the House, specifically on the Democratic Party, and that's sort of changing the dynamics a little bit as far as how legislation is brought to the floor and how there's a sort of consensus coming to potential legislation. And then finally, I think there is still the aspect that this has sort of been a semi-virtual session with legislators kind of coming in and out of session and out of in-person session. So it's sort of, all those are sort of, for lack of a better word, those are working for us in the short term on these issues, but don't necessarily reflect a longer term trend that these are no longer concerns. So we continue to monitor this. Dr. Talley and I both have regular discussions with our lobbyist groups and our professional organizations. And we have a lot of people looking out for our concerns in Springfield. So we will continue to monitor these two issues. So we are going to be starting our 6th year under the evidence-based funding model for fiscal year 2023. Just wanted to show sort of a quick snapshot of where we are as one of the 10 largest districts compared to those other 9 districts. Again, evidence-based funding was a model that was designed to improve the adequacy and equitability of K-12 funding in Illinois. It was done with the idea that it would be about a 10-year time horizon to do some of that, or at least that was sort of the political promise. I think what we're seeing, again, 5 or 6 years in, is that we've made some progress, but not a lot in that regard. And so just looking, our 2018 EBF percentage was 80%. So again, the first year after that first year of EBF funding, we're now at 83%. So we've increased 3%, but we're still obviously 17% behind 100% adequate funding. You'll see when we talk about the 10 largest districts, we're talking about roughly 30% of total enrollment in the state. So this tends to be a good barometer, of giving the totality picture across the state. Of the 10 districts here, nobody has changed tiers from 2018 to 2022. So 7 of the 10 largest districts were Tier 1 districts or districts in need of the most funding. And that's still the case in 2022 as we look to 2023. You'll see most districts are similar to us with increases around 3% of their total funding. There's a few outliers there that have increased more. Waukegan going from 51 to 64 really being that largest amount, or that only increase over 10%. I'll also point out there's one Tier 4 district in the top 10 districts. Even though the tier funding is designed to not provide significant incremental funding to our Tier 4 districts, that district has also seen a 3% increase in their EBF funding percentage. They went from 117 to 120%. So it really raises the question, how much of this improvement in that EBF percentage is from the new funding, and how much of it is a result of other factors occurring within a district, whether that's decreased enrollment or other demographic trends. What we've seen is that the majority of new funding will continue to go to these large Tier 1 districts. You'll see that the 2 districts that are larger than us, Chicago Public Schools and then Elgin 46, combined have received over 20% of the new funding that's in this formula. Actually well over 20%. It's closer to 35%. And that's pretty consistent with, I think, what we're going to see going forward. About 90% of the new funding is going to Tier 1 districts. So I did want to move on to the categorical revenues. Again, we are, relatively speaking, have some good news in this area. We've increased what we are budgeting or forecasting for categorical revenues going forward. Just want to talk through a little bit how these payments work. When we talk about categoricals, we're talking about grants that are designed to specifically reimburse districts' costs in 3 areas, and that's the cost of private facility tuition or tuition payments for some of our outplaced special education students, regular transportation, and then special education transportation. These categoricals do not offset these expenses dollar for dollar, though, and in some cases do leave pretty significant sources required for local contributions. And really that there's a variety of factors for that, but the first is that in the formula there's built in a local contribution requirement. In transportation, I think it's somewhere around 20% that off the top every district's supposed to contribute 20% to. The second reason is that there's a 1-year reimbursement lag. So we submit claims reports in these areas, but then don't receive the revenue until the next year. So this is similar to property tax, where there's a year, 18-month lag between when the cost is incurred and when we potentially see the reimbursement for that revenue. The third is that even though the formula includes a local contribution, there's always been an annual proration process that further requires additional local contribution even above what that initial formula said should be in place. That generally is about $3 million each year that it costs us. And then the final piece, which has been a historical issue with the categoricals, is delays in state payments. This was usually the first area that the state went to when they were short of funds in the general fund to short districts. We've historically seen delays of over a year in receiving categorical payments. We're supposed to receive 4 payments each year. We've had years where we've only received 2 or 3. I will report that for the first time in my memory, the state is up to date on categorical revenue payments. And so with that, we are forecasting an increase in these payments for really reasons that hit directly on that formula. The first, we are seeing increasing costs for these associated programs. We're seeing through the governor's budget that there is additional funding, though, that should at least maintain the current proration percentage or hopefully reduce that. And then finally, probably the biggest piece is we are forecasting that the state will stay up to date on these payments. There does seem to be a higher priority now than in the past on making these payments relatively timely. Of course, we will continue to monitor these categoricals and make changes as necessary. So just wanted to talk very briefly about the federal COVID relief funds. And I'll start with how we used ESSER 2 in the current year. We've covered this several times. Deputy Superintendent Carius did a substantial presentation in, I believe, a November board meeting. But these funds were used primarily to reduce K-2 class sizes. They were used for some district-wide coordinator positions. We've used them for academic coaches, interventionists, and community engagement specialists at the middle and high school level. And then we've used them for some additional programming and summer supports, as well as some nursing positions and contact tracing. The way we've budgeted these funds, we've known for over a year what our allocation was going to be between the ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 funds. We made a conscious decision to budget them evenly between the 3 fiscal years we're eligible to use them. That's an attempt to maximize the impact over those 3 years, and then also hopefully create a situation where those investments are sustainable and can be picked up by our local funds in fiscal year 25, 26, and on. And so with that said, that is built into this forecast that specifically the reduced K-2 class sizes and the district-wide coordinator positions will continue after these funds are used in fiscal year 24. I don't want to spend too much time on this slide. Again, this was shown in November during the ESSER presentation. I know it got some people's blood pressure up a little bit, so I'm not trying to relive that a little bit, but again, these are the same 10 districts we looked at for evidence-based funding, showing how much of the CARES 1, ESSER 2, and ESSER 3 funding they received. Similar to the discussion with the evidence-based funding, we are, while we're not among the lowest, we are the lowest of these 10 districts. Significantly, we do have districts that are like Chicago Public Schools that have received over $8,000 per student compared to our amount of around $500 per student. Again, this speaks to why we were very measured in how much we used this fiscal year, because we knew we did not have as much as other districts and had to work to maximize the benefit of these funds. Again, I know we talked in November about some of the specifics of how this is, how this came to be, that as a Tier 2 district, we're receiving less than some Tier 4 districts, how districts can be receiving upwards of 15 or 16 times the amount we're receiving. And the answer is really a combination of factors that really didn't work in our favor. Allocation was done based on the 2019 U.S. Census data for poverty count. That's a data source that does not actually reflect the students attending our school or any school district. Being 2019, it's a number that's very estimate-based or very rolled forward from the 2010 census. And then the final piece is it didn't, like evidence-based funding, unlike evidence-based funding, it did not factor in the local resources available to districts. So it, for example, did not credit that Naperville 203 has 50% more local funding available according to the evidence-based funding model. It just did it based on the poverty data with no not looking at other revenue sources. So just showing a summary over the last 5 years of the recurring federal revenues, or really those non-ESSER funds that we receive as a district, and really just want to talk through why we're sort of projecting that those non-ESSER funds are going to remain flat. Since fiscal year 18, we've seen a 7% decrease in the recurring federal funds we've received. You'll see the largest changes in the orange there. That's our Title I funding. So that Title I allotment, what's really driving that Title I allotment is that same census data that shortchanged us on the ESSER funds. So just like in the ESSER funds, we saw less revenue than other districts. We've seen about a 50% decrease in our Title I allotment based on that census data. So with that said, we are forecasting that these sources stay relatively flat over the next several years. And our best chance for that to change is going to be when the updated 2020 census data is what drives this funding, and specifically this funding of Title I. That's still a couple years away. So that's the summary for operating expenditures, or operating revenues, excuse me. I'm just going to move on to a quick summary of our expenditures. On the left, we do have a chart here showing our current expenditures, and again, this is what was in our fiscal year 2022 budget. As a reminder, an overwhelming majority of our expenditures relate directly to our personnel, either between salaries and benefits. That makes up in total about 76% of our revenues. Purchase services is 14%. That includes our outsourced custodial, food service, and transportation providers. So most of their costs are personnel-based as well. And so if you started to consider the amount of purchase services that in some ways really are salaries or benefits, you'd see we'd be even higher on that salaries and benefits amount. The remaining sources, when we start talking about supplies and materials or other purchase services or capital, again, we're talking less than 10% of the budget in total. We are forecasting annual expenditure increases that are generally consistent with the revenue increases we saw earlier. We passed a budget for this current year of just over $378 million in operating expenditures. We're projecting that to grow to about $440 million by fiscal year 2027. Just again as a reminder, this puts us at the bottom of our 8 comparable districts on operating expense per pupil. It also puts us about 18% below the state average for that operating expense per pupil number. And again, this reflects that we have the lowest evidence-based funding percentage of our 8 comparable districts as well. So again, a lot of the things we talked about in the revenue side pass over to the expenditure side, where we have less resources per student than our comparable districts, or even compared to the state average or the state funding formula. That drives some of the challenges we see on the expense side. So with that said, to talk through some of the current expenditure challenges, I think Board President Donahue emphasized it already. We have seen staffing shortages this current year. I think intuitively that would potentially create some cost savings, but what we're really finding is that comes close to a break even for us, because we end up filling the need with overtime, extra duty, additional substitutes, or even using contracted service providers in lieu of our own people to provide services. We are seeing price increases for technology and capital projects that are consistent with the CPI number of 7 or 7.5%. We're seeing supply chain issues, again, specifically in how we're structuring some of our capital projects for the summer. That's been an area of emphasis. I think we've covered several times, even as part of the boundary study, some of the transportation driver shortages and transportation challenges we've seen. Again, that's a nationwide challenge. We've talked about increase in fuel and natural gas costs. A lot of this is really in the news right now as a result of some of the geopolitical events, so we're monitoring that closely as well. Our utility costs, just as a point of reference, are a little over $4 million a year for heating and electric for our buildings. So, if you think about what you're experiencing with your home in some of those areas, a similar percent increase or change would be applicable to our buildings as well. Despite these challenges, I will point out that the district is currently within budget for the current school year. And so with that as a background, I just want to present to the board what will be our budget priorities as we work through this spring to develop a 2023 budget that, again, will be sustainable through those other forecast years as well. The first priority will be to be consistent with Board Goal 3, achieve balanced budgets and ensure adequate reserves. The second priority will be to maintain or improve our current student and staff ratios and class sizes. In general, I think the board knows we're projected to see enrollment decreases of about 1 to 2% over the next 5 years. So if we are able to maintain current levels of staffing, we would be able to see some improvements in class sizes. As mentioned, we've made a very conscious decision in how we're using the ESSER funds to support student achievement. And then finally, I'll point out that we are in ongoing negotiations with both our teaching or certified staff, our district transportation providers, and we will be starting contract negotiations with our classified staff as well. So that is obviously a priority as we go forward in settling our 2023 budget and beyond. So just wanted, as mentioned at the front of the presentation, we would cover our non-operating funds. The first of those funds is our bond and interest fund. This is a fund that's kind of been on autopilot for the last several years as we continue to pay down the debt that was associated with our significant building growth in the 90s and early 2000s. When we extend the bond and interest fund out to 2027, you will see that is the last year that debt is outstanding. As mentioned earlier, that would create a situation where we no longer have a bond and interest portion of our property tax levy. So I just want to talk through as we look through that 5-year forecast and we're finally able to kind of see the end in sight, what that means when we look in those outer years. So first, we do start seeing slight decreases in the amount of bond principal and interest we're paying each year. So we've usually been right around $27 million annually, and again, when those bonds were issued, they were done in a way that would keep that at a flat amount over the terms of the bond. As we get into these outer years, that starts to decline to where we'll be at $24.7 million, $23.8 million, and then finally just $15 million in fiscal year 2027. The second piece that will be evaluated as we get closer to that end is what happens with the reserve in that bond and interest fund. So we're currently projecting a $1.6 million excess that would be in the bond and interest fund after all the bonds are paid. And the source of that's a couple sources, but it's primarily because the DuPage County gives us a little extra 1% kicker, if you will, on the bond and interest levy, just to make sure we have enough to pay the bonds, make sure that we can cover any fees associated with those bonds, make sure that if we have significant property tax challenges or non-payment, there's still that little bit extra to cover those payments. So over the life of these bonds, now we're at 30 plus years of really having significant bond and interest payments, the cumulative total of that would be $1.6 million. That is an amount that, as we get closer, we'll continue to monitor in the business office. We would make a recommendation to the board either to have that available for transfer to the operating fund upon repayment of the bonds, or we would abate that final property tax payment slightly to reflect that excess. The second of our non-operating funds is our capital project fund, and this 5-year forecast has been updated for the 50 for 50 capital initiative we presented to the board in December of 2021. So just wanted to show what that looks like, and in short, it's a significant increase in our capital outlay related to our buildings and facilities. So we would increase from $6.5 million for that purpose in this current budget to $12 million for the next 3 years before starting to taper off as those funds gradually get spent down. And again, when we talk capital, specifically the non-operating fund, that's really spending down one-time revenue sources or some operating transfers the board has made in the past. There's really not a lot of significant recurring revenue. Again, just over $1 million generally in recurring revenue that goes into the capital project fund each year. This again was presented in December, but just wanted to bring up again what that looks like as far as scheduled work. You'll see we have a significant amount of scheduled work for this summer, and we're already starting to work on the scheduled work for the summer of 23, for June, July, and August of 23. I'll point out one big project, or really two big projects we're already starting to look at that will be a significant piece of either that summer or following summers. Is we are going to need roof replacements at both Waubonsie and Neuqua Valley High Schools. So that will be a significant, potentially multi-summer project at both those campuses. So with that, the next steps is that we'll continue to monitor assumptions. Again, we will present two more budget presentations this spring to the board. I believe tentatively scheduled for May and June board meetings. We'll monitor both the state funding situation and any potential state legislation. And we will continue to update the board as necessary. With that, I'm available for any questions.
All right. All right, how about Ms. Jane?
Thank you for the presentation. It's always hard. It's always hard to hear the explanation, even though I've heard it so many times, and you do such a good job explaining it. Like you said, it's hard not to get your blood pressure up. But I do appreciate the comment you made about yours and Dr. Talley's efforts, along with others, to reach out to our lobbyists and speaking and sharing our situation with decision makers, in hopes that they see how the algorithm or the equation is not equitable, as you stated. So thank you for that. Just a few points of clarification for myself. If we could go to slide number 12. So as you were explaining to us the context to understand this bar chart, are you saying that one explanation is the previous slide, slide 11, that explains why slide 12 looks the way it does?
Yeah, trying to make a little bit of a connection between some trends we may see intra-district with statewide.
Right.
So yes, that's part of it. Part of it is even more historical. It goes back to where districts were when the PTEL legislation came out in the early 90s, so over 30 years ago. But in general, when we look at our comparable districts, they have more taxable base per student, which can be having a higher EAV from commercial or industrial uses, or from having residential that's generating less students. Residential that generates less students can be because it's a more mature district. It can just be the housing stock. It can be a variety of factors. But yes, I'd say there's some connection with slide 11 in that discussion. And I would say that again, it's when you're so reliant as a state on property tax revenue that becomes a significant factor. And when you have a state funding formula that doesn't have a way to even that out,
right,
that becomes a significant factor when we talk through our districts, our district comparisons.
Okay. For slide number 14, can go to that. With the first two bullet points, could you provide some context with these numbers? Like historically, is this a significant number? And what does that mean for our district?
Sure. So the EBF funding formula, again, we're going into our 6th year. That $300 million increase has been in place 5 of the 6 years. Okay. That number was kind of the original promise, if you will, when evidence-based funding came into play. So the promise was that the state would enact this new funding formula, and they would add $300 million to the evidence-based funding portion, additional $50 million to a property tax abatement piece that kind of complicates things a little bit. Sometimes you'll see 300 or 350 million, depending on whether people are including that in the promise or the discussion. But yeah, that was the promise. So it was going to add 300 million a year for 10 years, so about 3 billion. And the second piece of that promise was that we would get all districts to 90% funded.
Oh.
Now, almost right away, it didn't take a lot of math to figure out 300 was not going to do the trick. It was going to take closer to, I think, 500 or 600 million up front. So you kind of had two promises that really didn't work from day one. And then again, what I think we showed on the next slide here is that, well, about halfway through, again, we're showing some progress, but we're not seeing progress that would suggest that 90% funding is 4 years away.
Okay. Last question here. With the ESSER 3 funds that we get, is there an expiration date? Like, is there a deadline by which we need to spend those funds?
There is. It's not exactly June 30th of 2024. I believe we get until September 30th. So there's a chance we could spill it a little over into fiscal year 2025, but at least for this forecast, our focus would be to spend it evenly over the next 2 school years. So the 22-23 and the 23-24 school years.
Okay. Well, thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.
Ms. Deming.
Mr. Shipley, as always, thank you so much for the explanation. And it is very difficult to look at those ESSER funds and see how we were impacted. And every time it comes up, it does get you a little, does get me a little upset.
Well, Doug has to present next, and he may have to leave the room before.
Slide 7 and 8. Can you just, when we talk about, that as you talked about what it means for, that difference in the PTL CPI, what does, when we look, can you just share, what does that mean? I know it means less that we can levy for, but can you talk about what type of impact that might have?
Yeah, good question, and makes me regret I didn't put it in the slide.
Sorry.
Yeah, so 2% would be about $6 million. So that's again a $6 million loss that carries forward into future years too.
Okay. And I was just noticing, did we change where we stand in the state now? Did we move from number 4 to number 3 on slide 15?
I would have to check. In my view, we're kind of tied for third with Plainfield and Rockford. So
okay.
Depending on the source of data, it can kind of vary. But if we're not 3, we're 3.5.
I just wondered. Okay. Slide 28.
All the way.
Actually, I think it was. I think it was on. Actually, I think it was. I can just ask the question. I think it was on another slide. Do we have? Has the transportation company? Do we have any type of forecast? What's going to happen on drivers and things next year? Are we hearing anything that anticipation?
We are. I think we're hearing that the challenges that we thought. Well, I guess I should backtrack a little bit. I think there's a little bit of a misconception that this is a COVID-related challenge related to our driver shortages, and the truth is we've seen driver shortage challenges for several years prior to COVID too. And again, not just at our district, but at a national level. So it's just something that COVID kind of made worse or brought to the forefront a little bit. We are optimistic, or we are working closely with our transportation providers, that we are holding our own in the discussion. But realistically, I think we're still going to see challenges next year in that area. So I will reiterate what Board President Donahue said. If you are interested and willing in driving a bus, please consider helping us out.
And then I just wanted on, let's see, on slide 16, just for edification for our public, where we have private facility tuition costs, can you just share what that is, please, just so people understand what that means?
Sure. So those are our students who are some of our most highest need students that as part of the IEP process, it's been determined we cannot meet their needs in district, that they need a more specialized facility to attend to their needs and provide their free and appropriate public education. District throughout the district, I mean, it's a relatively small percentage of our students, but when you're a district of 26,000, that still equates to a significant number. And again, these are some of our most expensive students, again, because they have some of the most challenging needs or highest number of needs. So the way the categorical is designed, or the reason it there is that the state recognizes that these are students who have high needs or have a high cost associated with them, and the categorical is designed to reimburse sort of the portion of the cost that's in excess of what the district would be expected to provide. And so for our district, this categorical it has ranged between $2 and $3.5 million a year. At smaller districts, that number is not as consistent, and so they may go a year or two where they have none of these students and don't receive the categorical at all, and then have a year where they have one or two of these students and do receive the categorical. So it is, but it is a number that for us, just given our size, is a pretty consistent and predictable revenue source.
Thank you. Just wanted to, I wasn't familiar with that many years ago when I joined the board, so I just wanted to have that edification for maybe those that weren't aware.
That's a good, and I'll make one other comment related to the categoricals, that we used to receive 7 categoricals. So instead of having 3 balls kind of going through this filter, we would have had 7. And what happened with evidence-based funding is that they made an effort to pull several of those categoricals into the evidence-based funding formula. And what happened is they wanted to get all 7 in the formula, and these were the 3 that they just couldn't figure out because of some of the inconsistencies between years when it came to transportation, just because then you had rural versus urban or suburban districts. And so these 3 categoricals are the 3 that just, they for lack of a better word, they couldn't figure out a way to build it into the evidence-based funding formula.
Thank you.
Mr. Rising.
Slide 22. I just wanted to highlight slide 22 again. We always talk about our comparable districts, which are equal unit districts that are suburban, that are high performing, and nationally recognized districts. And I just wanted to point this out for the fact that you did and you're highlighting, is that as a district, we spend less operating expense per pupil than our other comparable districts and the state average for that fact. And then if you jump to slide 12, as Ms. Jane pointed out, the reason for that is, on slide 12, is that we receive less EAV per pupil. So we have a lot less local revenue. And again, I'm just highlighting these things. It's not necessarily questions, but I think it's important for people to understand that, and this is a testament, I believe, to our administration, to our board, to our teachers, and to our parents and students, that while we spend the least amount per pupil, we get amazing results, and we have a lot. We're very frugal and spend our money wisely. And then, if I could have you just go to slide 15. I would like the public to focus on slide 15 on the last two columns, because I think that's very important just to recognize that, yes, tier 1 districts have a lot less local property tax equalized assessed value, but the comparable that tier 1s have received per pupil, that we've received $140 per pupil, and all those other districts are much higher, I think is important to notice. And I actually looked up how much each one of those districts spend of the top 10 per pupil, and all but 3 of them spend $2,000 to $5,000 more per student than we do as a district. There's 1 that spends less, and then 2 that spend about equal to what we do per pupil. So they're receiving a lot more state money, they're receiving a lot more per pupil, and they're spending a lot more per pupil than we are able to as well. And then last thing I wanted to bring up is slide 19. Yeah, I think this slide gets all of our blood boiling. Again, this is the ESSER funding. Slide 19, and again, it's important that people pay attention to that last column, the per student allotment. Of the top 10 districts, we receive the least amount of ESSER funding per student. Again, all of those districts except for 1 spends more per pupil than we do currently. And they receive this much more money in ESSER funds. And I also wanted to thank you, Matt. April 26, 2021, June 14th, 2021, 8/23/2021, and your 3 budget presentations in 2021. In depth, you talked about ESSER funding and where we were spending that money. And I want to compliment administration. On December 6th, we had an extensive ESSER funding presentation that was 15 slides that discussed where we were spending that money and how it was helping our students in achievement, and it was going all towards our students. So I just wanted to point out that while I think we are all frustrated that this wasn't distributed maybe as equitably as could have been, that we have always been transparent of where we put that money. So I just wanted to thank you. That's it.
Ms. Fosdick.
Right, first I just want to say, well done, staying on budget with all of these additional challenges that have happened. So kudos to you and your team for making that happen. I really just have one question or point of clarification to ask, which is on slide 20. You talked briefly about trying to advocate in Springfield for some recourse maybe about getting dinged by that survey or the census data. You said for both ESSER and Title I allotments, as I see on slide 20. It was my understanding that Title I allotments were based on the free and reduced lunch percentages at the school. So can you explain a little bit further how the census data affects that in this case?
Yeah, it's and your question gets to what the disconnect is, right? So the funds are allotted based on U.S. Census data. They're allotted based on poverty percentage, which is, again, when you get to a 2019 data point, is not maybe as reliable as a 2010 or 2020 data point would be. But those funds are allotted based on that census data, but then we are expected to provide services based on that free and reduced lunch percentage. And so the free and reduced lunch percentage is a different data point. It has different parameters than that poverty count. And again, this gets to a census data which doesn't necessarily reflect students that are actually in our buildings, whereas the free and reduced lunch count does. So, yeah, I hope that that answer makes sense. But I think your question really got to kind of what the frustrating part of this in the ESSER slide is.
It did help. Thank you.
Ms. Grover.
So I too have a question on slide 20. Am I reading it correctly that even with SR funding, the federal funding is decreasing?
This slide took out ESSER funding specifically. Okay. This was really just focused on our three main recurring federal revenues, so IDEA, Title I, and Title II and Title IV. So yeah, this is absent the ESSER. But yes, you're correct. Absent the ESSER, we have seen a decrease over the past 5 fiscal years.
So do you think with the ESSER funding and seeing how it's helped not just our school district but throughout the nation, do you have a sense that perhaps the federal funding will increase, or?
Well, again, if I did, would I be here tonight, right? I would say I think we are optimistic, as always. Yeah, the truth is I couldn't say that. Unfortunately, I think our best chance for increased federal funding is going to be when that 2020 census data is updated and available, and starts building its way into the funding. Again, that's probably still a year or two out. And I'd say if you look at how our Title I funding is going, we unless they're going to give us negative money, we can't go much lower. So it seems like there's only upside. But yeah, as far as talking programmatically, if there's significant increases on the federal side, at least I'm not hearing it at this time.
The other thing I wanted to point out is slide 25. We talk about the 1.6 available after the bond, and you think that's a lot of money, but then you go to slide 19, which is much more. Then you break it down, it's only, and that's much more, 500 per student. So 1.6 is not that much comparatively. So I just want to point that out. But
yeah, that's helpful. Yeah, it would be and again, I would think at this point it'll stay kind of in that 1.6 range. We'll continue to monitor it. I mean, there's a chance it becomes 1.8 million, but yeah, it's 1.6, and again, it would be a one-time. That would be a one-time transfer when those bonds are paid off.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Mr. Krubis.
To build on the line of question about the federal funds, on slide 18, you talk about the funding cliff. And then you go to slide 5. And I know you were put on the spot about
all the way back to slide 5.
Predicting federal revenue. But your projected budget, could you speak to what happens with both the funding cliff and the federal contribution to our budget in slide 5?
Sure. So to basically take that ESSER funding and how it's impacting this slide specifically, our current budget 22, our budget 20, our projection or tentative budget for next year 23, and then 24. Those all include ESSER funds, and so that's about 16 million, 15 to 16 million for those 3 years each. Again, that's about 6% of our total budget. Starting in fiscal year 2025, we would not have ESSER funds available. At this time, we are hopeful we would have other federal funds, but there's nothing, no guarantee on that. And so that would drop our federal revenue to just over 11 million for that 25, 26, and 27. So that's that sort of one-time cliff, if you will. So that's why as we designed what we wanted to fund the ESSER programming with, we were conscious of, A, not increasing that cliff. So not creating a situation where maybe we used all the federal funds in 1 or 2 years and then had a $5 or $6 million cliff. And secondly, we wanted to make sure that we could find other local sources, other state revenues to hopefully fund or to plan on funding the key components of that ESSER fund, which again was the K2 class size reduction and also some of the district-wide programming. So we have done that as part of this forecast. We would project that starting in 25, we'd have that reduction in federal funds, but we would still fund those positions. So I hope that
Thank
that's
you.
your
Yeah,
question.
moving to slide 15. Is it 15? Yeah. This board is going to be required to advocate in Springfield within the next 2 years about changes to the evidence-based funding because according to quick math, Chicago Public Schools is going to be coming off from Tier 1 to Tier 2 shortly. And them being the political powerhouse that they are, they're going to suggest changes in Springfield to try to put them back in Tier 1. And so we're going to be forced to say these changes shouldn't be done. So I think this board is going to need to, once again, shift its focus to Springfield, local advocacy with our representatives to make sure that if changes are made, they're made with our voice at the table.
Yeah, I'll just make one quick comment that sort of echoes that, is that when evidence-based funding again started and we go to some of the initial promises that were made or statements, one statement was that 50% of the new funding would go to Tier 1 districts, 49% would go to Tier 2, and then 1% would be left for Tiers 3 and 4. What was kind of in the fine print, if you will, is that Tier 1 districts are also considered Tier 2 districts. So it's kind of like the analogy I've used a little bit is it's like going to Thanksgiving dinner, having all the Tier 1 family members going through the buffet line first, and then you think it's your turn and you're told, no, they actually get to go through and get their seconds before you get to first. So that's kind of where we're at is we're sharing our pot with those Tier 1 districts as well. And then also, again, to use that analogy, the amount that you receive incrementally is based on that actual funding percentage. So not only are they getting to participate in both rounds of the funding, their Tier 2 funding is even a bigger share of that helping of funds. So it is a challenge, and it is something that, again, was, I think, known when we started with evidence-based funding, but again, maybe wasn't emphasized as much. And honestly, we're stuck in the middle. You know, we're a district that isn't in a Tier 3 or Tier 4 where we have enough local funding to get by and to be able to kind of not pay attention to what's going on in Springfield. But unfortunately, we're not one of the Tier 1 districts that is getting sort of that funding priority or that advocacy priority in Springfield.
By way of history, when the formula was getting developed, this board did advocacy in Springfield to try to have its voice heard. And the way the math was breaking out, CPS was going to be a Tier 2 school district until a last-second change that added its pension into some of the math, and then it bumped it into Tier 1. So it's important for us to be prepared for that advocacy, and it is nice that, you know, they're progressing, but we've got to be aware of the political reality of the state. So that's in our interest as local elected officials to have a voice in Springfield on this issue that is going to come. Thank you.
So everybody picked my favorite slides. 15 was one, though, that I also wanted to ask. The cumulative new funding. So that is funding that was received between 2019 and 2022 on top of what was the original baseline for evidence-based funding?
Fiscal year 2018 was the first year. So yeah, that's the cumulative above the baseline when evidence-based funding started. Again, the formula assumes sort of a hold harmless component where you're built in that you receive at least as much as you did the prior year,
Right.
and then you kind of accumulate up based on your tier and how they add the additional funds.
So when you think about $140 per student that we received over that time, and you have over a 7% CPI this year, it's like it's kind of not helping us at all. I mean,
It's $140 per student. It's pretty marginal, yes.
right. Very marginal, yeah. The other thing I like is slide 24, and thank you for the presentation, and I hope our audience is listening to this because this is very important for our community to understand how our funding is situated in our district. And I think 24 was something that I thought was a really good summary of the key things that we want to make sure absolutely happen with our priorities here. And, you know, part of it also is we have a big negotiation in front of us that we have to close on. And so I just wanted to make sure that this was up in front of everybody again as something that was very important. But thank you very much, Matt. It's very informative. Thank you.
Thank you.
Excuse myself
Okay.
briefly.
Our next discussion item is by Dr. Talley and Mr. Doug Icarius on mitigation update.
Ms. Donahue, as they are making changes, I'll start and then Mr. Carius can speak. Mr. Carius will share with you some updated information regarding COVID-19 and our plans going forward regarding mitigation. We have been on an ever-changing journey over the past 2 years as we have navigated and responded to COVID-19 regulations and requirements. On Friday, the Centers for Disease Control shared its latest update around 4:30 p.m. Updates from CDC and from the state seem to always come late Friday afternoons, and this Friday was no exception. Before I turn it over to Mr. Icarius, I want to say one thing. Throughout the past 2 years, we have stayed consistent in our approach. We have followed requirements from the CDC, the Illinois Department of Public Health, and the DuPage Health Department. Rather than changing whom we followed, we have followed the same organization so we could be consistent in our approach. What Mr. Icarius will share tonight will continue along that lane of consistent approach in whom we follow and what we follow. Our continued goal is to have students in school safely so children can learn. Mr. Icarius?
Thank you, Dr. Talley. Good evening, Board of Education. This presentation has changed a little bit over the past week. One of the things I just realized that some of the page numbers also dropped off. So feel free to ask questions along the way as well if you do have questions, because it might be a little bit more difficult to refer just back to a certain slide number. So I apologize for that. One of the first things we'll do is just talk a little bit about the updated CDC guidance. We are still trying to digest that, but wanted to give as much information as we could right now. In the future, we can also tie a little bit more to how that connects to us. We'll also talk about some of our current metrics, which Dr. Talley had referred to when he first sent out a letter, community letter about reducing some of our mitigations across the district. And then just make sure that we're clear on what current mitigation procedures and protocols we are doing, some that might be a little bit confusing to some people. So want to make sure that there was clarity on that. So first, this slide and the 6 that follow it are straight from the CDC PowerPoint that they had on their website from February 25th. So you will not see on each of those slides something from the CDC. Just wanted to make sure that you see clearly that these next 6 following this do come from there. The first thing that we included was CDC's indicators of community transmission. This was first released in September 2020. In our district, most people would probably be pretty familiar with this graphic as it's been on our web page identifying which kind of level, transmission level we're in and what mitigations we have associated with that. It relied on two metrics. As you know, the total new cases per 100,000 in the past 7 days, which is one of them that kept us in high for most of the last year and a half. As we were seeing that most of the time our cases were over 100 cases per 100,000. And then we've seen our positivity rates all over the place over the last 2 years. But that was the other percentage. When we first presented in July, we were very encouraged by our low positivity rates, but then we saw quickly as the new cases per 100,000 increased, and at that time, you had to use whichever was the highest of the two. The current state of the pandemic requires a refined approach to monitoring COVID-19. Community transmission indicators were developed in fall 2020, as we just showed, reflect goal of limiting transition anticipation of vaccines being available. Neither of the community transmission indicators reflects medically significant disease or healthcare strain, which is what they looked at with this new guidance that came out. Community transmission levels are largely driven by case incidence, which does not differentiate mild and severe disease, and that's what they wanted to differentiate this time. So they really wanted to pull into there. They narrowed their list of candidate indicators based on criteria with mostly related to hospitalizations, and that's going to be the information that we see as we move to this next slide. Many counties across the whole United States heard about being in green, and this is kind of what's referred to as being in green. When your community is having fewer than 200 new cases per 7 days, you follow the top two indicators there, one being new COVID admissions per 100,000. And that's, as I said, admissions into the hospital and percent of staffed inpatient beds occupied by COVID-19 patients, 7-day average. So DuPage is currently in the green, indicating that we are less than 10 new admissions per 100,000 and less than 10% of staffed inpatient beds occupied by COVID-19 patients. So those are the indicators. We haven't seen that specific data from our hospitals. We're taking it by what CDC has provided us at this time. And we're hoping that updated information will show us what those numbers look like. Once again, just implications for using COVID-19 community levels to inform public health recommendations. They can, help guide us in, different settings. At higher COVID-19 community levels, recommendations could include masking, different testing strategies, high-risk individuals in their household or social contacts, setting specific recommendations. This is what we've seen has happened in school settings, and then high-risk congregate settings. Currently in the green, they talk about just making sure there's access to vaccines, making sure that there's access to testing, are some of the biggest mitigations that they're suggesting, and how to be prepared. Key considerations, once again, vaccinations leading public health prevention strategy to prevent severe disease and deaths from COVID-19, ensuring that people are up to date when making decisions about individual preventive behaviors and community prevention strategies. In addition to vaccination, people and health officials should consider the COVID-19 community level. Some other things for health departments to consider, and then keeping track. We've learned a lot over the last 2 years about different layered prevention strategies. And knowing that those are at hand in case needed in the future. We also want to talk a little bit about our rationale and our current metrics. We looked at our local zip code vaccination rates, our local zip code 7-day positivity, local zip code 7-day new cases per 100,000. We've also know that since July, vaccine eligibility at that time was for 12 plus, and now it's at 5 plus. Prevention and mitigation strategies. We have many different strategies that we've used. We've kept and continued the emphasis on in-person learning and keeping students in person for learning. We also are looking at our in-district positivity rate, which is really our new cases. I'll explain that when I get to that slide. It's our cases throughout a week, divided by the total amount of staff and students that we have across our district. And then local hospitalizations, we were actually at this point in time kind of looking at, were they doing elective surgeries? We didn't have the same type of data. We didn't know what was going to be coming out from CDC, so we felt like if our hospitals were performing elective surgeries, that meant they were in a better shape than they did when we were seeing peak transmission. So this was just pulled from the IDPH site. We have the 7 zip codes that we include in our school district. You'll see there, and this is under the category of fully vaccinated. They also show 1 dose on there, and they show fully vaccinated. So you'll see across our 7 zip codes, it ranges from 72.88%. This was as of February 24th, all the way up to 90.22% in one of our zip codes, which actually is, I think, our most populated zip code as well. And then you'll see the 7-day positivity rates, as I said, from 224, which was 2.94% across our 7 zip codes, and our new cases per 100,000 was down to 94.9. I think our positivity is actually lower than that right now, but our new cases is actually back over 100, but our everything seems to be trending lower. This is our percentage of weekly on-campus positive individuals. As you know, on our dashboard, and these numbers are taken right from our dashboard, well, the numbers are that calculate this. We're using a divisor of 30,000. That's how many cases in the week divided by that number. There's, I think, quite a bit of effort on our community, on our staff, parents and students, ensuring that if a student was symptomatic or testing positive, that they were not sending them to school, would help keep our on-campus low. We might have other people in the staff or students who never came on campus when they were positive, and those would not be reflected in here. So a lot of this is self-reported. We don't test all students, and so we wouldn't have an exact number throughout the week of how many people are testing positive. These are ones where we do know they either experienced symptoms and went home and tested and were positive, or they were a close contact of somebody who was positive and experienced those symptoms and so on, would have led to the numbers in our school district. You see our most recent one is 0.10. At our highest, it was 0.66%, and that was in January, when we know numbers were high across the state and quite a bit of the country. Our current mitigations, really staying home if experiencing COVID symptoms, but that's like a lot of, any kind of illness. If you're noticing symptoms, we're hoping that you would stay home until either you're fever-free for 24 hours or not experiencing some of those other symptoms. We're still promoting vaccinations. We're still encouraging respiratory etiquette, hand washing. We're recommending mask usage, isolation of COVID-positive students and staff. So if you do test positive, the current guidance is still to isolate in that situation. They use the difference between isolate and quarantine. Isolate is if you're positive, quarantine was if you were not positive. And then with visitors and volunteers, originally we had discussed about, we currently do have volunteers in our buildings. Under our mitigations, we had that because we were in high for so long, that they weren't working directly with students. I think Dr. Talley had indicated that at the beginning of the fourth quarter, we would change that practice, and we're actually looking at March 9th for bringing in volunteers and working with students at that time. It gives us a little bit of time to see how things are going in the district since we've changed our mitigation strategies. Our current isolation exclusion protocols, remember this is if they are COVID positive. This is current. We have not received, since we've received the CDC updated guidance, we have not received anything from IDPH or DuPage County Health Department. So the current practice is for any persons who test positive for COVID-19 or symptomatic individuals with exposure, they're required to isolate for at least 5 days. In addition, no fever, vomiting, or diarrhea for the previous 24 hours, which might mean if they're still experiencing those symptoms on day 6, they shouldn't come back yet. This applies to any kind of illnesses if you're experiencing those symptoms. If you're not experiencing symptoms, returning persons, if they do come back after 5 days, are supposed to mask for days 6 through 10. If not masked upon return, they should be isolating for the full 10 days. As I said, those are the current guidelines from the health department. Current contact tracing and quarantine procedure. I know there's a lot of small writing on here. I'll sum it up for you. When we have a person who tests positive and they were on campus, if they were within... All right, guess I'm done. Sorry. All right. So if they're within, if you remember, if they were within 6 feet for at least 15 minutes, they would be considered close contacts and should have to quarantine. This past year, that changed to 3 feet because we were doing universal masking. We're no longer doing universal masking, so close contact would be, again, within 6 feet. Of who would be recommended. The first thing that happens during contact tracing is somebody showing symptoms or not? If they are showing symptoms, they should not be coming to school, so they should be quarantining if they're showing symptoms because they would be assumed positive. Anybody else, if they're not showing symptoms, they might be recommended to quarantine, but nobody's being required to quarantine if you are asymptomatic. If you are recommended to be quarantined and you the parent and student choose to go ahead and do the quarantine, they will have access to our synchronous distance learning at that time. We are also, for some parents who they want to send their child to school, but they also want to monitor. We still have the test to stay ability where they could still test on days 1, 3, and 5 just to monitor and take those tests if they feel more comfortable doing that. And then, or they can return to class and monitor their symptoms. Any individuals that do become symptomatic will have to follow the isolation procedures. Hopefully that makes sense, but I'd be glad to answer any questions on there. It's just we're not requiring any kind of quarantine if people are not showing symptoms. Once again, instruction during that time is just students in quarantine will receive instructional and social emotional support based on individual needs, while greatly influenced by the courses each student is enrolled in. We know it looks different across the board depending for any of those students who are isolated or accept to go on quarantine as well, that we try to make the learning experience as beneficial as possible to those students. And with that, I'll be glad to take any questions.
All right. Let's start with Ms. Grover.
Doug, can you repeat what you said about the volunteer, please?
Yeah, so currently we've had volunteers in our buildings, but they've been not working directly with students because we've been in that high transmission area. So starting March 9th, we're planning on volunteers to be able to come back into our buildings and work in those environments where they might also be close to students at that time.
Okay. And then
we originally thought Q4 we would start, but we feel like we can start earlier, and I think that's going to be a benefit to our schools. I know they can use support as well, so that's
I
why
know, like earlier we had talked about field trips, earlier presentations. Have we?
We're approving field trips again, not just within zip codes, but we're looking at all different options for field trips.
Okay, and then I think it was like the second to last slide, 14, current contact tracing. You had mentioned synchronous learning. When does that happen?
We've already been doing that for any students who we had required to quarantine or isolate, or if the health department did, they did have access to, we had teachers providing remote instruction for those students.
So that is when you are symptomatic and you're quarantining, you get synchronous.
If you are, even in some of these situations, if you're not symptomatic, but the parent does want them to quarantine and not go to school, if we had placed them on quarantine because they were a close contact, they would be able to get remote learning. We do add those, and we have, our teachers have done a phenomenal job. We've hired separate teachers who help support that learning depending on the grade level for the students.
Now,
That's been happening mostly at our elementary, where we've been providing that synchronous opportunities.
Okay, but if you are sick, then it's like a sick day. If you have something else, then you're not provided that.
If you're sick, yeah, you do not have to jump on and just like anybody, we would want them to focus on getting better versus exhausting their energy on some of those other things.
Okay. I think those are all my questions.
Mr. Krubis.
So, within the last month, there's been a temporary restraining order, an appellate court decision, a Supreme Court decision, a J-Car ruling, no action from the General Assembly, governor announcement that he was going to change the mask mandate to be a local decision. Governor issued an executive order today. There's been changes in the CDC rules. There's been no change in the IDPH rules. There's been no change in the ISBE guidance, but it says that they are going to work to update their guidance ASAP. There's been no change in the DuPage County Health Department's guidance, although it is in the process of updating the contents of its website, all within the last month. I applaud the district for acting swiftly and in a measured manner in this dynamic environment. It's unfortunate that with all the changes in the last month, that is in stark contrast to the certainty and foresight that was included in the phased manner of the Restore Illinois plan. So it seems like we are stumbling across the finish line here in a haphazardly way. Currently, it looks like we have some guidance from the CDC with some more information to come, but we have the local power to use our discretion to make decisions on this matter. That's all I got. No questions. Thanks.
Ms. Deming.
Thank you, Mr. Carius, for your presentation, for the update, and diligence that you and Dr. Talley are using to, keep us moving forward as things change so quickly. And President Donahue, I just had one question, and Ms. Grover asked it, so I'm good.
Okay, Mr. Rising.
So could I just have you clarify again, Doug? Oh yeah, you're on the slide. Okay, good. And I asked this prior to the board meeting too, but I just want to clarify again. So it says individuals that are fully vaccinated and asymptomatic are not recommended to quarantine. If you're a non-vaccinated student and asymptomatic, but named as a close contact, are you recommended to quarantine?
What we've been doing, I would say yes, the health department has, that was the guidance provided, that they were supposed to quarantine at that time until we had test to stay put in place.
Okay.
And then at that point, they could choose to test to stay. If they did not agree to test to stay, then they were quarantined at that time.
Okay, so there is still...
We're still letting parents know that because of under the current guidance that you would be recommended for that. It's just not being required.
Okay. And they can still test to stay if they just want to make sure
Yeah.
their student.
And if you're symptomatic, whether you're vaccinated or not, you should be isolating at that time.
Okay. And then I have to ask, why are we still, having the pre-K kids, the under 5, in masks? I'm just trying to understand.
So I can talk to that. One, the CDC has new information that will be coming out soon regarding pre-K. It has not as of yet. Two, if you also look at the American Academy of Pediatrics, they mention masks for all children. I did mention vaccination information is not available for those children who are pre-K. That has been delayed. It will eventually happen. We will continue to monitor this information and make changes. It's not necessarily we will be waiting 2 months when the vaccination comes out for those children. It may be sooner. I'm waiting to see the latest from the CDC.
Okay. Yeah, and I just want to echo the thanks too here. It seems, it's almost becoming a norm now where we get stuff on Friday and then there's a board meeting. We have to do everything over. So I applaud the administration for re-looking at how we monitor and measure these things. Our staff and our teachers who have been burdened by all of this stuff unnecessarily, and our parents and students, this hasn't been easy on anybody, academically, emotionally, or physically. Where we are today, I feel is long overdue. There's part of me that feels that this should have been the way we did things from the beginning, but always been cognizant in protecting the most vulnerable and our immune-compromised students. I'm not saying we got everything wrong, because I think we got a lot of things right. There is still frustration on my part. Like Justin said, everybody's all over the board between CDC and IDPH and ISB, and I'm still not happy about the pre-K kids being in masks. And bottom line is, this shouldn't have come down to a school board making a lot of these decisions. And it's frustrating. It's maddening. Legislation should have stepped in earlier. Yeah, school board members are not medical experts. The decisions of mask, quarantine, and vaccinations is not a decision any school board member should have to make without guidance. And I recognize that it seems like for every study that's out there, there's an opposite study. Our district made the decision, since we aren't medical experts, to follow community medical experts, and that's CDC, to IDPH, and DuPage County Health Department. Did other states get it right, or more right than we did? I guess you can make that argument. Did I always agree with decisions that were made? No. Do I still agree? No. But I support 204 and the decisions and guidance that we followed for our whole community. Just as we listen to our police on safety issues, we listen to medical expert on safety issues regarding a pandemic. I look forward to us moving forward with this new guidance while still being concerned about all our students' and families' health, but getting back to some sense of normalcy as safely as possible. Thanks.
Ms. Fosdick.
Thank you for the presentation. I want to say thank you also to the administration for the level-headed and measured approach with which you've addressed the last 2 years. I just have one quick question for point of clarification from the IDPH website. When it says fully vaccinated, does that mean boosted or just 2? Or just 1?
I've
It doesn't
looked
say.
everywhere on there, and I cannot get
Okay.
any kind of clarity on that. So
Seems
I
like
think
it's
it's at
different
least
places.
the 2,
Okay.
But I cannot tell. To me, I mean, it goes from 1 dose to fully, so
Right.
it's really hard to tell if they're including anything related to being boosted.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Ms. Jane?
I echo what everybody said in terms of the administration's response. Although I'm annoyed that it came on Friday, I'm happy it didn't come tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
Where that would have been worse, I guess, which happened once for us, over the summer. So again, I'm going to go back to slide 15. Well, we're here. Just to clarify, so if I have an unvaccinated asymptomatic student in close contact, that student is no longer required to isolate.
They're not required. The nurse would still, at this point in time, and I say at this point in time because we are anticipating that there could be some future guidance coming out about whether you even do contact tracing. So we're waiting to receive more guidance, but right now, any students, like I said, within 6 feet, but it is just recommended. They'll have that conversation with the family and give them some options.
And so irrespective of vaccination status, if the student is symptomatic, then that is
currently they're required to isolate.
They're required to isolate. Okay. When we're talking about the vaccine,
and obviously the nurses would work with them if there was some other reason why they might be showing symptoms that might not be COVID related, but they've been doing that whole time as well.
And the nurses would also communicate the opportunity for test to stay.
Correct.
Or that's only when they're asymptomatic. Test to stay is
no. Well, yeah. Anybody symptomatic, correct.
Okay.
Would be isolated.
When we're talking about vaccination rates, I know there's been conversations or emails that we've received about how those rates were calculated, or are those actual rates reflecting the number of students within District 204, students and staff that are vaccinated?
No,
Can you clarify that?
That is, the information that was in this slide is just by our zip codes, the percentage in those zip codes. We have not required anybody to produce vaccination status. For our students have not, were never required to produce their vaccination status. And so we don't have a rate of how many of our students are vaccinated. So that's just straight zip code data that you can find through the IDPH site. And I believe, from what I can tell, is those percentages are based on people eligible for the vaccinations as well. So when they show that, like in 60564, 90.2, and they say 98% had at least one, they're not including, at least from what I can tell, 0 to 4 year olds.
Okay.
So, but they don't give a very good explanation of exactly who. That's why, the fully vaccinated, to my assumption, is either, that you had the initial 2 doses, but it's hard to tell.
Right now, is it kind of unclear to us what is the scenario where masking might be required? Like, is that what we're kind of waiting to hear, so that table is filled out a little bit more than what we've seen today?
One, I think we're hoping that
I hope that never happens,
not.
but I'm just
I think
hypothetically.
what the CDC is going to ask us to, well, hopefully what information is going to start being provided for us is looking once again at, they're trying to differentiate between severe illness and not severe illness. That's why they're looking at what's happening in the hospitals, especially when they have I think what I read through that document is with the higher vaccination rates, they're seeing less severe illnesses. And so I think you're right, though. I mean, there could be some different variants that do different things. It's hard to predict right now what that's going to, what would trigger that. We're going to, I think, do what we've done, and that's try to collaborate the best we can with our health department on trying to keep people as safe as possible.
We are on I'll remind everyone, we are on day 3 of this new information. Almost exactly day 3, because it came out at 4:30 on Friday, and so a little more than 3 days and X number of hours. And so all of this is, as I mentioned in my first comments, this has been an ever-changing pathway. And so I think to your question about masks, we'll have to see what happens. That's really the only thing we can say to answer that question, because we don't know where the CDC is going with this. They themselves have said more information will be coming out, and we have to see what IDPH and DuPage Health Department, and I did ask the DuPage Health Department today about some information, and they said we don't have it yet from where the CDC got the information. And so this is to the best that we can provide.
And I appreciate that. I asked that question more because I think that is on parents' minds, and I think it's important for them to know that we're kind of rolling with it, and that I think hopefully what we'll see in the future is a more nuanced approach to all of this, you know, considering all the variables that need to be considered. My last question for now, as if from what we know right now, should parents anticipate communication from the district if they see changes in levels or changes in approaches?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, as we digest this information and try to see, you know, even right now, what we're communicating on our website, we're going to have to look at how we do that differently right now. We did update today with the most recent information, but it's no longer going to be really a good guiding tool for our community as we've looked at other pieces of information and data. And so we'll look at how we can update that as a communication tool as well for our community.
I had an email today from a parent wanting to know about the data that we have on our website now, and it's still saying we're at high. And I said, please listen to the board meeting tonight, because we'll be talking about the changes that will happen. And then, as Mr. Karius mentioned, we will have to determine how we're going to put this on our website. So that's not going to happen tonight. It won't happen tomorrow. Remember, day 3.
Yep. Thank you.
Okay, so I also want to add my thanks for all of the work that you did, administration, around this presentation today. The public doesn't know, but we had a different presentation that you had carefully worked on with a big strategy all last week, and probably were working on it for weeks before that. And 4:30 on Friday threw all of that up in the air. And you know, thank you for all of the work to go through this material and try and figure out a strategy here for our district. It has been extremely frustrating, and we, the 7 board members here, are not health experts, and we look to our health department for our guidance, but yet we have competing guidance from different groups constantly, and we try and make the best choices that we can. I will say that we have been consistent for the past 2 years in saying that we follow the health department guidance, and I don't see us ever changing that. But we have seen things where we have the CDC saying one thing and the Illinois Department of Health saying something else, or the DuPage Department of Health not respecting what is being said by other groups. So we do get in the middle of this, and I truly, truly appreciate the thoughtfulness and care that goes into building this proposal and presentation for our community. Everyone's not going to be happy with this. This doesn't answer every question, and we are going to continue to see churn. We have to remain flexible and cautious. We want our children in school, and we will do everything to continue to make that happen in a safe and productive way. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right, our next item is legislative advocacy and the Board of Education update. Do we have, you have an item?
I do. IASB is looking for proposals. The deadline is March 7th. It is proposals for their panel discussions for the November IASB conference. March 7. So it's 7. So it's coming up like a week. I was thinking of maybe putting something together on engagement and seeing how that works. So I'll send it out to everyone to take a look at and see what they think.
I think it's always wonderful if we can present a panel, and so I would encourage everyone to consider thoughts and opportunities to present a concept.
Do you want us to, if we have ideas, send them to you or Natasha?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, I attended the LEN meeting on Friday, and I will send out the material from that meeting tonight, but lots and lots of action going on in Springfield with many different proposals around things related to the school district. So we're fortunate to have Len out there watching what's going on and advocating for our district. So I will provide that information. So with that, I need a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Do I have a second? All in favor? Yep. Aye. Thank you.